Hey everyone, it's Jim
and Charles
from Valves and More, an online vintage tube seller. And today in Tube Lab number 214, we're going to talk a little bit about fraudulent sellers, fraudulent tube sellers, and what to watch for. But first, we should mention that the Black Friday sale is almost over. It ends on Monday, December the 3rd, so we have the weekend and Monday.
Yeah, but we've been busy. We broke records for the first couple of days of the sale, and we've been sending out a lot of really good tubes.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed is that the last few sales in particular, so going back a couple of years, quite a few people are buying spares and backup sets of their favorite vintage tubes, and there's a good reason for that. The availability of vintage tubes just gets lower and lower, and a lot of quality vintage tubes are either endangered or they're now extinct. And as time goes forward, I'll continue to keep you up to date on the tubes that are vulnerable. In fact, at the very end, we're going to show you a bunch of really high quality vintage tubes, mostly power tubes, that we still have some good inventory on.
Yeah, but who knows for how much longer.
Yeah. Okay. But first, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult a professional technician when in doubt. Now, normally at this time of year, we issue the beware of seasonal fraudsters caution and call it all good. Job done. But this year, the fraudsters are working overtime to try and shift your hard-earned money into their pockets. So we thought, let's do a whole episode on this important subject.
Now, it might sound like we're complaining here. Maybe we are a little bit, but this is a warning to everybody to avoid what we've done and save your money.
Yeah, and there's an awful lot of very good tube sellers out there, so we're not tarring everybody with the same brush. And those good tube sellers, maybe every once in a while they make a mistake, but when we actually see a lot of tubes come in from some of the really famous tube sellers that have been around for decades, and we retest them, of course, and almost always their numbers are good. So I always feel really great when somebody is out there and pushing premium product, basically
taking their job seriously, sending out good tubes, because that's what we like to do ourselves.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, now the most common fraud is to sell on a site like Facebook Marketplace, where you have that's zero way of getting your money back, and your only option is to name and shame. I got burnt this way many years ago, and the seller got upset when I named him. And I thought, well, that's just too bad. Another common practice is to handle the transaction through PayPal and ask for a family friends transaction. That's the equivalent to handing over cash, and there's you guessed it, zero way to recover your money. Okay, by now you're getting the picture. Never make a purchase in which your money isn't secured by some form of reliable purchase insurance, which will basically allow you to recover all or most of your money if the transaction turns out to not have been as advertised. And even with insurance, you can still take a loss. I remember we made a large purchase from a gentleman in Germany who never actually shipped, even after 2 months, and lots of correspondence. And he only refunded our money when we threatened to exercise the insurance on the transaction. However, because of exchange shifts, loss on exchange, we ended up still losing $120 and lots of hours of our own time. Now, move forward a year, and someone wanted advice on buying an expensive tube tester. In fact, one of these babies. And he asked for advice on one of my Facebook sites. Now, he didn't name names, but he didn't have to. I recognized the MO and asked him a few simple questions to verify, in fact, it was the same fraudster. And yep, the same guy from Germany, same BS about not wanting to do a PayPal business transaction. Now, when we dealt with him, we insisted and eventually took our money with the insurance on the transaction. Otherwise,
we would have been out of luck.
Yep, thousands of dollars would have been lost.
Yep.
So, yeah, so be really firm. If somebody starts to waver and say, oh, you just aren't serious, you don't trust me, or anything like that, then that's your cue. Exit.
Yeah, now there's a few other reasons why we have a tube tester on screen here. Another common scam that you're going to see is people selling really nice looking equipment. Testers, amplifiers, headphones, things that look pristine and for a really good price online. Too good of a price.
Or
probably too good to be true.
Yes, or they're advertising that it's a TV7 tested tube. And here are the great numbers, and you can rely on me because I show a picture with the meter pointing at 100% or at the mutual conductance number if it's got a mutual conductance meter on it. And that's all well and good. But if they're advertising a power tube tested on the TV7, that's not so good because this is a GM or mutual conductance tester. And that is absolutely the tester you want. And there's other testers as well, but the TV7 is the most famous for voltage gain tubes. And those tubes include the 12AX7, the 12AU7,
6SN7, 6SL7, all those tubes.
The rectifiers can be tested properly on this as well, and a whole bunch of other really weird tubes that you've never heard of. And here's the interesting thing. Most tube testers will have in their testing data sheets, they'll have power tubes listed. Now, a power tube is not a voltage gain tube. It is a current gain tube, or a current pusher is a good way to put it. And when you're testing a power tube, you want to have the voltages up around somewhere in the normal operating point, and you want to be somewhere in the center operating point. And these testers don't have the voltage for the plate, and they don't have a current meter. Now, you could modify almost any tester. You can actually stick a current meter on and get a current number, but you're still not testing your power tube at the right operating point. Now, why does this matter? Because a high GM or mutual conductance number on a power tube, when that same tube is put on to an idle plate current tester, that you might end up with a high GM on a TV7 and a very low current reading on a proper power tube tester. And it can be the other way around. And this is not some stuff that we're BSing. This is something we can see the data.
Yep.
And
so you can have two tubes with matched GM, but different idle plate currents.
And not different by a little bit, different by a lot. So watch out for that. Improperly tested power tubes. Now, if you're bringing in a set of miscellaneous power tubes and you're going to test them properly, it really doesn't matter, so long as the seller gives you tubes that are operating properly and aren't worn out. And talking about worn out tubes, why don't we clear the decks? And Charles has got a whole selection of tubes to show you, to give you some idea of what to watch out for visually.
Okay, be right back. Okay, I have some fantastic tubes to sell you. Just take a look at how great they look here. Let's start over on the side here and look at this. This one is totally still working.
And it's got a unique white dome.
Yeah, that must mean it's worth more, right? Well, actually no, that's a sign that the guttering is gone. This tube, garbage.
Now, when the guttering is gone, that's an indicator that the vacuum is gone. And when the vacuum goes, vacuum tubes don't operate anymore. Mm-hmm. And power tubes that have lost their guttering, they burn up real fast. So,
yeah.
Talking about power tubes, I think that's a KT88, is it?
Yeah, and it's supposed to have some lovely guttering up at the top here. Where did that go?
It's got a little tiny bit. Now, if it had, let's say, a little tiny bit more, that you would think, well, maybe there's some life left in that tube. And the answer is maybe a week. So, yeah.
It might operate a little bit longer, but it's not long for this world.
Yeah. So our personal rule is that the guttering must be at 60% or better.
Mm-hmm. To even be worth considering.
Otherwise, we throw them out.
Yep.
And of course, it still has to test well as well.
And you wouldn't believe how many sets of tubes we see on a daily basis that have bad guttering, power tubes in particular, that people pull them from their amps whenever they're done and try to sell them on to someone.
And in fact, this summer, we made a purchase on Canuck Audio Mart, which used to be a forum for gentle ladies and gentlemen to sell tubes with no transactional insurance, just bank to bank. And it was
entirely based on reputation.
And mutual trust and respect. And for years, it's been great. There's a companion site in the United States
I think it's US Audio Mart.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's probably versions of this. I think there's one in Europe as well. And unfortunately, the fraudsters have infiltrated. And we purchased a huge lot of 6550s from a gentleman and paid a lot of money.
And in the photos, he showed a couple of very nice looking tubes, and that was not what we got in.
Well, we got the couple of nice looking tubes that sort of barely passed the minimum spec, and everything else in the box was completely worn out like this.
Yeah.
Or very close to it. And I had to actually threaten to have him charged with fraud before he sent back the money. And we still lost money on the deal.
Yeah, okay, well, here's a great looking 9-pin tube. Look at how nice this is. This is definitely new old stock, right? I mean, just look at those pins.
Yeah, now what that is a good indicator that there's been a problem. Now, it's possible that whoever bent those pins out trying to get a good connection didn't realize that they had to clean the pins or the socket, and maybe it was just a socket problem, or maybe it was just oxidization on the pins.
Or maybe this was bouncing around in a box with 100 other tubes for a few years.
But whenever you see really badly bent pins or badly oxidized or worse on power tubes, traces of material left around the pins and on the pins, that's a very good indication that was a problem in circuit or with the tube. So stay away from those. There's a lot of people selling basically junk pulls.
Yep.
They're called pulls because they came out of old equipment, and there's nothing wrong with that. But
as long as they're tested and cleared and checked correctly to make sure they're still in good condition and don't have pins that look like this.
Yeah, I mean, for a number of years, Charles had a really good supplier of pulls, and we would buy literally tubs of tubes.
Yep.
And pay good money for a tub of tubes, and then spend weeks
throwing out over half of them and finding the good stuff.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well over half.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there are some new old stock tubes that you'll find that are new old stock, new in box, and they'll have a little bit of a bend to the pins. Oxidation is pretty normal too if they haven't tinned or gold plated them. But if they look like this, if they've been bent all to hell, if it looks like someone's gotten in there with pliers and tried to bend them back in shape or something, it's not worth grabbing. These pins will snap off.
Yeah. So you might wonder, okay, so what do you look at when you buy tubes wholesale? Well, we look at the guttering first, we look at the pin second, and then we look at the condition of the base and the overall tube third, and we try very much to buy from the same wholesalers, people we've dealt with for years. And they'll charge us a little bit more to send us the good tubes, and we're happy to pay that because
we get better stock and it takes us less time to actually sort through and clear things.
And then you get the very best of the tubes from these tube hounds.
Now, what about whenever you have an absolutely beautiful looking tube like this Baldwin branded 6SN7?
It looks brand new, and yet it's probably about 60 years old.
Now, this is common with these Baldwin tubes because they spent their lives sitting inside of organs. And organs have generally a lot of use on them.
And the circuits are not normally balanced. So what happens is And a lot of organs are church organs, the vast majority, in fact. And people would forget to turn them off or be under the impression that you don't turn off your organ because you always want it ready to make music, right? So, and in a busy church back in the day, that might have made sense. But the problem is you wear out the filaments on them and you burn the sections of a twin triode, right? Most tubes, 6SN7 is a great example, but a lot of other tubes like the 12AU7 have two tubes in an envelope. And in most cases, not all cases, but in most cases, modern and vintage preamps and power amps need
match sections.
Match sections.
Yeah.
So this is...
So what you'll see with these organ tubes, you'll see this often with Baldwin branded 6SN7s from Sylvania. You'll see it with RCA branded 12AU7s, or RCA made 12AU7s, I should say. They will look beautiful. You'll find a seller that has 10, 20, 30 of them listed, all lined up, looking identical, great bases, great glass and gettering, but they won't post testing numbers.
Yeah.
Or if they do, they'll post a caveat and say, well, if you test them yourself, your tester is not accurate. I have the most accurate tester in the world.
That's a good indication that there's trouble coming your way.
Yeah.
In the mail.
They will look beautiful, but this tube, garbage.
Yeah. Okay, what else have you got, Charles? Okay, now the tubes that we just showed you all came out of a dead and damaged bin that we keep. And we keep it actually just so that we can use it during tube labs and, you know, other examples that we need for people. Otherwise, they'd be in the garbage. In fact, we just put the garbage out on the street yesterday or the day before, and I brought the bag from Charles's lab down.
Clinked.
And I had to be careful because it was filled with glass, and it always is every week. Yeah. So that's where bad tubes belong. So what else have you got to show us, Charles?
Oh, I have a beautiful Sylvania 6SL7, a beautiful Canadian GE 6SL7, and a beautiful RCA 6SL7 to sell you.
And nice real vintage boxes. What could possibly be wrong?
Yeah, you should buy them without looking in the box. I guarantee you're going to like what you get, except what do we have in here really?
Yeah, and that's something I should mention. Some tube sellers actually don't show the tubes. They show a nice box.
Or they'll say this is, a representative photo of what the tube looks like. So let's take a look at all three of these tubes. We have the Sylvania, we have the CGE, and we have an RCA. And they look suspiciously similar.
Actually, they look exactly the same, except for the printing.
And let's bring one more in here. Aha! That is a reflector label. That means that this is a Soviet manufactured tube. All of these are Soviet manufactured tubes from the same factory in the same place and differently branded. So this is just a good example of both being careful what you buy, making sure you see it, see the construction of it, know what you're getting whenever you're purchasing it, but also about how rebranding muddies the waters, because you'll see something like a Sylvania made in USSR, so they correctly labeled it. The CGE made in Italy.
Yeah, now CGE is Canadian General Electric.
Mm-hmm. So they lied about its location of manufacture, and the RCA made in the UK.
Well, it's sort of close to the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is an example of the games that the manufacturers used to play, but still confuse things nowadays.
No.
Especially if you're looking for something like a really nice Sylvania 6SL7, you want to actually get a Sylvania-made 6SL7.
Yeah, which is a great sounding tube. Now, this happened really commonly at the end of the second tube era. So that's the mid to late 1970s into the early 1980s. As tube plants were closing down, companies that were in the tube business and were closing their own plants were trying to source tubes that they could still sell to meet demand. Now, if these Soviet-made tubes were great sounding, then this would be mute, right? Because who really cares if you got an RCA branded tube labeled made in the UK if it's a great sounding, really a great sounding Soviet tube. But if we take a look at this tube, well, the reflector plant, this is the plant that New Sensor owns now and makes all of those reissues at. And this would not be a problem, except this is one of the worst sounding 6SL7s ever made.
And worst testing, they tend to be mismatched, microphonic. This is actually a nicely matched example, but I haven't listened to this one, so it might even be microphonic or noisy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Last time we had to clear these for somebody, I think I threw out a dozen of them before I found some good ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're just not great tubes, and you don't want to get them in place of something that was supposed to be a high-quality U.S. manufactured tube.
Now, for some applications, maybe a piece of test equipment or something that just needs a 6SL7 in circuit, I think we actually still have them in the store at a very inexpensive price. And like Charles said, we'll go through and we'll try to find the best ones that we've got, and we have a lot of them.
Yeah. Well, less now that I've thrown out a bunch.
Yeah, but it's not a tube that we get behind or promote or anything like that. You'll never see us touting a bad tube as a good tube. Mm-hmm. And good tube sellers are reliable that way because I think they don't want to send out junk, so they get behind the tubes that they're promoting. So it's always worth listening to what a seller likes. And we often get inquiries saying, Charles, what have you got for nice 12AX7s and 12AU7s?
Yeah, this is what I'm putting it in. This is what I'm looking for. What can you recommend?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the opposite is we often get people looking for specific rare tubes, and we have to be honest with them and say, look, in all the years that we've been in business,
I've maybe seen one of them.
yeah, and it wasn't testing very good. It was extinct years ago, and that's something that's hard for people to understand, that there's a limited supply. I mean, and in cases of tubes that were never made in huge numbers to start with, and we're talking about 70, 80, 90 years ago, they were in short supply 40 years ago. So, yeah.
Well, one last thing to cover, though, are the scammers that are out there that are just complete and total scammers. And the easiest way to find them is to pay attention to the photos and to do reverse image searches on them. So typically what they're going to do is just try to get you to send a deposit or a transfer or something like that. And they'll steal somebody's photos from eBay or Facebook Marketplace or Canuck Audio Mart. And if you do a reverse image search, it'll find the origin of that photo, and you can identify that person as a scammer right away and just report them, get rid of them.
And another really good thing to watch out for, well, it's a bad thing, is when you see somebody with a listing with a lot of really fancy colors in the listing. So they use 3 different colors in the writing, lots of exclamation marks. Now, I like to use exclamation marks, not in our listings, but in our scripts, because, well, it's a script for, that we like to kind of jazz up a little bit.
Yeah, but if your listing looks like an old GeoCities or MySpace page with all those flashy colors on it, avoid.
And the other thing that's a really good indicator that you've got somebody who's selling you a bill of goods, and that's not a good bill of goods, is if they've made reproduction boxes. Ooh. That is the number one clue that you've got some crook out there, because
they're trying to dress it up.
They're trying to dress it up. So, and we got caught this way. We bought a whole bunch of what looked like really nice tall boy 6SN7s for a lot of money. He had made new boxes, but he put up the testing numbers, and they looked great, and the tubes looked fabulous. When they came in, the testing numbers were totally fraudulent. There was no relative comparison between the testing numbers on the tubes and the actual reality. The boxes were good reproductions, so you could tell that they were reproductions. And somebody had actually cleaned and waxed the bases of the tubes, so that they look brand new. So, yeah, so...
a lot of effort into selling junk.
Well, yeah, but there was, on that transaction, $600 US.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so...
All right, now let's go take a look at some actual good tubes that we've got in for you.
Yeah. Okay, enough doom and gloom. Let's take a look at some really nice, high testing vintage power tubes. And actually, I think you've got a rectifier to start us off with.
Yeah, we've managed to find some more of these beautiful 5AR4 Matsushita manufactured tubes, also known as the GZ34. These have been trickling in lately. We've been able to find a few more. I think we have maybe 4 or 5 of them in the store right now. And these are great tubes. They were made on Mullard/Phillips tooling. They're fairly late production. They're testing fantastic, and they have really strong gettering on them compared to those last tubes that we were looking at. Look how dark that is.
Yeah, now that's not an indication of a manufacturing defect. That's just a sign that the vacuum equipment that was available at the time had improved so much that the vacuum was really hard that was applied. So manufacturers reduced the amount of gettering as a result, and the gettering would get discolored.
Yeah, it's not as pretty as the bright, shiny chrome dome, but it does mean you have a really good vacuum on the inside, and
yeah,
that's really what matters there. So we got some more of those in, and hopefully we're going to have some more Blackburn Mullard ones following it, but that's not going to be for at least another week or two, so they're not going to be here before the sale ends, unfortunately. Next, we've got one of our favorite, if not our favorite, EL34s ever. This is a Mullard XF2. And
now this is an example of a power tube that's rebranded, and many of the Mullards were. Mm-hmm. In fact, we estimate that roughly close to 50% of all vintage vacuum tubes were rebranded. So it's not a sign of a defect. It doesn't change the value of the tube. It certainly doesn't change how they sound or operate. And this tube is and has been for a while on the endangered list, and it's getting close to being declared extinct. We specialize in this XF2 series, and we used to have a bin full of them. Now, you need a lot of power tubes to match quads up closely. And during the sale, we sold pretty much everything down. I think we might have one good used quad left.
And we just got a few more in here that we have yet to test, and hopefully we'll be able to make up another quad maybe, but we can't know for sure.
Yeah. It's going to take a while to actually build up inventory, and we probably never will have a lot of inventory, but every once in a while we'll put together a quad, good, used, or new old stock, and yeah, we'll let you know when we have one.
Mm-hmm. Now next, we've got these wonderful RFT manufactured 6CA7 EL34s. We were really lucky and found a big batch of these that were new old stock, new in sleeve, and
new in box, and they're all rebranded National. And National Electronics was a commercial wholesaler, and they like to put their brand name on all sorts of things. So sometimes they would put it on a really great EL34 like the RFT, mostly just to cover up, I think, the fact that it came from the former East Germany.
Yeah, well, it does say made in Germany here, but they're not giving you details.
Yeah, well, at the time, West Germany would have been fine, but East might not have been. But unfortunately, they also did some really dogs, and so you can't judge the label, the rebranded label, as being good, medium, or bad. It's just you have to take it on a tube-by-tube basis.
You see that a lot with a lot of the major tube rebranders. Ones like International Service Master, you would get fantastic tubes with them, and you would get garbage tubes with them.
Yeah, you just don't know. Now, this is one of the available high-quality vintage EL34s that we have in number with high testing. In fact, we were talking earlier about idle plate current. So this is an idle plate current testing number, 63 milliamps, 65, 64, 65. It's so close that it's almost an exactly matched quad. And that doesn't really mean anything to anybody, does it? Unless you know what the center testing value is. And the center testing value on our custom power tube tester matcher is 60 milliamps. So when we ship out a match quad or a match pair, and I'm thinking about it, I normally will let the customer know what the center value is so that they can say, oh, okay. So if it was a good use set and it was testing 50 milliamps, that would be a really good number. Obviously 20 would wouldn't be, and in fact, we wouldn't be selling it. It would be in the garbage. So,
But something around 60, 63, that's bang on new old stock. That's exactly what you want.
no, that's the center. 60 milliamps is the center for new old stock. So some of new old stock EL34s will test down around 50 milliamps, and some will test as high as 70. That's why we call it a center value. But most will test somewhere in the, touching somewhere near 60 milliamps. And this is a great vintage EL34 for a very clean, clear, detailed sound. It has less warmth than the Mullard, less warmth than the Svetlana, the true Svetlana St. Petersburg EL34, which I think we still have a few quads left. Okay, what else have you got, Charles? This is the true Svetlana KT88, and these are really hard to keep in stock.
Can you tell that we like Svetlana?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. SED, or Svetlana Electronic Devices, deserves to be recognized along with the other great tube manufacturers. Everybody knows that Mullard made great sounding tubes. Telefunken make great sounding tubes. Philips, Sylvania. And then it was hit and miss with GE, RCA, and a number of really good vintage manufacturers.
But the true Svetlana St. Petersburg production tubes, we've never listened to one that we haven't loved.
Yeah. They really did a great job making them. It was a huge loss because the factory stayed in business until about 2000. They probably weren't making tubes for a couple of years, but at that point, the tube resurgence was just sort of starting to happen, and really, I think they made a dumb mistake. They should have stayed in business. They would have had a huge part of the global tube market would have been theirs.
Yeah, and these are the big brother of the 6550s that we were just looking at. These are the KT88s, which is probably one of the more powerful of the vintage power tubes that are out there, and they are just absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. The one of the real benefits of the true vintage Svet power tubes is, particularly these KT types, is they have a nice bit of warmth in the mid-range, and that's just not common for the type. And now the mid-range of the average KT tube doesn't sound bad, but it just sounds very neutral and extremely flat. And at that point, you may as well have a solid-state output device. So we're really glad to have some in stock for a little while. And when we just keep on investing money into inventory so we can make up quads. And you might wonder, how many power tubes do you need to make a close match quad? Well, like a couple of dozen. 24 is pretty close to the minimum. So it's a huge investment to keep them in stock, because let's say we'll have 2 match quads and 40 tubes in stock. So anyways, if you stayed to the very end, here's one supreme discount code that's good until the last day is Monday, December the 2nd. I think I said December the 3rd, but in fact it's December the 2nd. And it's good for everything in the store except for the kits and gift certificates. And of course, we can reach almost everybody around the world with flat rate $20 shipping. And you can't see it, but if your order is $150 or more after discount, the shipping is on us, folks. Stay safe, everyone. I hope everyone who's enjoying a long weekend is, relaxing and listening to some wonderful music.
And I hope you all had a great Thanksgiving.
Yeah, this is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Cheers, everyone.